to another episode of Comp and Coffee. I'm excited to be here again with both Matt and Bill. Matt, we're heading into the fall season. How is the leaf situation in your locale there?
I'm looking out the window right now, and it looks beautiful here in Scituate, Massachusetts. I wasn't expecting a leaf question, too, so I'm not prepared with a huge dialogue.
Not prepared with a witty leaf response, Matt?
No, you should have warned me about this.
Well, I didn't think it would require research, but looking out the window is good. Bill, how is it in Boston? Do you have a lot of leaves in Boston? You have sort of like trees along the streets there.
Well, two things. One is I am at home looking out the window, and it's mostly green, actually, a little bit of yellow, but no red or orange. And I'll also say, since I'm looking out the window and I'm at home, a little like siren alert, may be interrupted like in, other COVID podcasts. But yeah, beautiful day here. It's like 70 degrees.
Yeah, it's actually been kind of cool. I was up doing so for those who aren't familiar with don't live in regions where the leaves change colors dramatically. So here in New England, we're famous for it. But it is like literally you drive 1 hour north and the level of peak leaf color is dramatically different. So we're just starting to get some good color here in southern New Hampshire. And I'm about 40 minutes north of Bill, who is saying it's still all green. And this weekend I drove like an hour and a half north of where I live to the White Mountains, and it's peak up there. Like everything is like fireworks, oranges and reds, and it's just gorgeous. So good weather to get out there. It's going to be past peak probably in another week or so. So if you are a leaf peeping professional, now is the time. And it's budget season. A lot of our clients are deep into getting those budgets ready for next year and figuring out how they're going to respond to all this excitement. And Bill, you found an article that I thought might be interesting to talk about, as so many organizations and HR teams and comp professionals turn towards, what are we going to do in 22? You found this article titled "The Golden Age of HR" over on Axios. Now, what attracted you to this article, Bill?
It's mostly the headline, but also just the general premise that because of this confluence of, unusual things happening in our world and our economy, HR has been skyrocketed to a level of high importance and prominence, much more so than in the past, to help companies get through these challenges of dealing with remote workforces, layoffs, the Great Resignation, high stock prices, high unemployment, all at the same time. And I said it too fast because it's a podcast, but if you think about it, this stuff like never always, it doesn't all happen at the same time, and so the fact that it's happening is, pushing and pulling organizations in all kinds of strange directions. And all of these issues are falling on HR. And this is where you're going to see HR divided into the strategic HR people helping companies, initiatives and goals, and then the tactical HR people that are just doing blocking and tackling and benefits admin and, 3% salary increases.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is I think a lot of listeners here are listening to this and they're on the front lines of this and they're like, yeah, but why is this the golden age? Like, why is this, our lives seem like they're harder? In fact, we did an episode, I don't know, it was a while ago now, a few months ago now, but it was sort of the premise was how COVID is screwing up HR and making our life hard. But the sort of the underlying premise of this article, which I thought was interesting, and Matt, I'm really interested to hear if you're hearing our clients talk about this at all. The premise is because HR is sort of, I think their quote was vaulting in importance, right? And to Bill's point, they're really looking at them more carefully, and a lot of these new challenges are just falling squarely on the shoulders of HR, rightly or wrongly. It's a golden opportunity for HR to finally sort of get that seat at the table. Matt, are you sort of hearing that from our clients? Are you hearing anything from folks saying, I got these new responsibilities and we're trying to figure out how to do all this while I still do my other day job?
Yeah. I think HR has always been quite busy. I think that there's some new responsibilities and new visibility on them. And, what I'm hearing is that they have the seat at the table now. Executives, up to the CEO, CFO, and, that level of importance is, they're focusing on HR now. And they're being brought to meetings and asked about what are we doing about, retaining our employees, what's happening with the Great Resignation. And then you can get into these compensation conversations that, maybe we're just done behind closed doors and, just handled within the compensation world before. There's more interest there, which creates more work, more visibility to the HR department. So I'm sure there's some frustration with the amount that HR is being brought into things, but also if you want to feel important, you're going to have the extra work to do as well. You know what I mean?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. And I think that everything you just said really aligns with a lot of the data points this article brought up. So it mentioned that HR jobs are spiking. So listings for HR roles are up 52% apparently this year. More firms, according to this article, are hiring for roles like chief people officer. So having HR folks directly reporting to the CEO in more cases. And they talk about a lot of these new responsibilities you just mentioned. And Bill, you mentioned these too, like HR is now responsible for figuring out the mask and vaccine policies. HR is now dealing with remote work management. They're dealing with things like therapy pets and gender designations and any hiring requirement changes. There's been a lot of pushback on their requirement for college degrees. And are you going to deal with that? And how are you going to do that? And in fact, the entire function is being rebranded the people team, which is not really new this year. That's been going on for a little while now, but it seems like that's all being called to the front. But I want to ask you this, Bill. I thought it's Matt, you mentioned the Great Resignation. Bill, you mentioned the Great Resignation. And I was just at the Mid-Atlantic Employers Association. Thank you for having me down there. It was a great conference. They had a nice little gathering in Philadelphia. Some was in person, some was remote. And it was it's always fun to listen to folks in this space just talk about some of the challenges and things they're wrestling with. And there was a panel there of again, chief people officers, VPs of HR leaders. And one of them just basically stood up in front of everybody and said, the Great Resignation is an excuse. If you're being affected by that, you're just not doing HR right. And I love that he said that. And I thought it was really interesting. I think we hinted at it last time we talked about the Great Resignation too, that it's so much easier for people to pivot now. And if your company's not doing HR right, you're more likely to be hit by this desire to pivot. Bill, what's your reaction to that? Does that ring true for you?
It does, actually. It's funny. I'm laughing inside at the question because I didn't know it was coming, Russ. Or I guess I'm saying that.
I'm just full of surprises today, Bill. It's fall. We got to mix things up. Keep it crisp, like an apple.
So,
yeah.
So I agree, and I think when I spoke a minute ago, and said that HR, there are going to be two kinds of HR people: the strategic HR people and the, tactical ones. He is clearly strategic and looking at this as what's HR's role and what should you be doing, and when he's sort of pointing out the fact that if all you're doing is sort of managing, and it's like when, somebody leaves, we have to fill out a form to request a backfill. And that's very tactical, very process oriented, but not very strategic, not very forward thinking. And that is sort of what's happening. And lots of companies have been caught flat footed because they're thinking, we're a company, we have the jobs, we have the money, we're in control. There's a pandemic. What are people going to do? Well, we now have the answer to that. Is people are going to talk to their friends. They're going to spend some of their time looking at job boards and other career sites, and they're going to look for other jobs. And they're going to look for more money, better culture, better environment, things that more align, like business missions that more align with their personal, values. And lo and behold, it's like they're finding these jobs. And so, I think the gentleman you're talking about is right, that if you have engaged employees and you have a connection with them, you're not experiencing that same level of, outflow, employee churn, whatever you want to call it, that's unusually high, or in the, what do they quote, 40%, 50%, and that you are, managing the people, you've got the right people in the right places, and you're doing the right things to keep them happy, engaged, motivated, and, members of your team, part of your culture, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that what's sort of interesting too is um, I think a lot of this happened, and Bill, to your point, one of the things the article also sort of mentioned was that furloughed or laid off workers from industries that were hit really hard, like hospitality or travel, and even in healthcare, when the elective surgeries and things were pulled back on, when they were furloughed, they were like, well, why am I staying in this industry? And so they went somewhere else. And now these companies are trying to fire back up. And I think a lot of the reasons those furloughs were handled incorrectly was when companies were really looking at their bottom line, HR was still in this sort of back office role. And one of the things the article also mentioned is that one of the premises of the article I wanted to get your guys' feedback on, in pre-pandemic days, it was harder for HR to demonstrate their value. Like it was just sort of like a thing you did that was a nice to have, and sometimes you don't need it. And so when you were looking at the bottom line and your EBITDA going into 2020, and you're like, oh my God, the world just changed. How do we even not go deeper in the red? HR is kind of the first to cut. And Matt, I remember on some of our meetup calls early in 2020, we'd get on the phone with some groups of clients that were having a lot of furlough, and they were talking about their challenges very candidly. And like, well, one of the things they did was the first team furloughed was the furlough team. And so the people that all knew how to do layoffs and manage all that stuff were gone. And so those folks they didn't keep any connections with their laid off employees. They didn't do anything to manage that. And so when it came time to bring people back, they were in a very bad position. Whoops. Apparently Siri wants to chime in on this. Matt, does that ring true with you? Do you remember any of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember talking with people, and they were talking through related topics like communicating out issues about, not even issues, but updates about COVID, opening offices, trying to keep staff engaged while they're working remotely and motivated and all that sort of stuff. And they were down to teams of one or two, and the people that they would normally rely on to, do these communications, get them out to employees, have experience doing all this stuff and keeping employees engaged, were gone. They've been furloughed or laid off, even worse. So they're struggling there. And I think, back to, the original sort of dialogue that we were having when we were talking about this, I think what's a great thing that's happening now is I'm seeing teams that are growing, HR teams, because HR compensation is becoming a more important topic, more to the forefront, that I'm seeing teams being able to actually hire, compensation analysts, HR analysts, all those sort of positions that, you see at larger companies because they have larger teams and, there's more of a need there, but you're seeing them down to smaller companies now too, where they're like, when you look at like a sales team, they always have like a full operations team, all of your sales reps, all that sort of stuff. HR, many times it's down to one or two people doing a lot of things, HR, compensation, benefits, communications like that. And I think it's great to be able to see these teams growing as well.
Well, and can I jump in there, Russ? One of the things about what Matt just said is when you get down to that, skeleton crew in HR, like the things they have to do are not the things of the highest value to the company. That's when you start getting into all these kind of regulatory requirements, is you have to fill out government forms. You have to, manage benefit enrollment processes. You've got to manage all of these things that have to get done, but aren't really making employees happy, engaged, aren't adding value to the sales team, as Matt said. It's just stuff that you need to do. And so there's a bare minimum, staffing for HR that's not really going to get any kind of, I'm beating the same word to death, the strategic gains for the company. They're just going to get the job done, the benefits done, salary increases done, that kind of thing. But that's not really where the value of HR is. And we as a community, as HR and comp people, need to make sure that we're providing that value, because that's where people see us. And I think back to Axios, what the article was saying is that companies are starting to focus on those things and sort of looking at HR to be that strategic partner, which HR has always wanted to be, the quote, seat at the table. So I think this is, the door's open.
Yeah, I think that is the sort of the idea. And I think you both nailed it there. with this idea. And Matt, I was super excited to hear you say that you're hearing clients are doing more hiring in the comp space, because what Axios sort of pivots to, and then sort of their conclusion a little bit is, hey, so yeah, there was this pre-pandemic time where you'd cut HR and you'd get them to the bare minimum where they could barely keep up with just the literal back office stuff, the things you mentioned, Bill and Matt. And now they realize, oh crap, there's all these important things they could be doing beyond that. So let's staff up. And they quote all the things we already know. They quote the 40% of workers are considering a job change. They quote the massive layoffs that have occurred in the past and that people are dealing with and trying to get all those people back. They talk about the challenge of distributed teams and employee engagement's harder than ever. But what's interesting to me is they don't talk about the importance of compensation. Nowhere in this article. And this is fascinating to me. And this is where I think our opportunity is, because if it is a golden age right now, meaning it's a golden opportunity, I think kind of the thing I think is we're not in the golden age yet. We're in a golden opportunity to create a golden age of HR would be sort of the way I would frame this. And companies are now understanding the criticality of what the HR team does. And what I would argue the total rewards team does. I wish there was more prominence on total rewards in an article like this as much as there is on people. Because really, when you say total rewards, what you're really saying it is the company's obligation to reward people for working for you, to recognize their presence and their aid they're giving you and the value they're adding to the organization. And one of the things that continues to sort of I worry about as someone who advocates and evangelizes compensation and making sure your people are properly rewarded, that's not in this article still, and we're still making a miss. And what's funny is at the Mid-Atlantic Employers Association Total Rewards Conference, it was interesting that a couple different groups brought up the importance of employee engagement, and two different companies shared almost this exact same story where they had a person getting ready to leave for literally, both of them said this number, a $30,000 a year pay increase. And the first thing they did was match it, made a counteroffer, and then they talked about all their good, other engagement benefits they were doing to keep that person and to get other people to stay. And I'm just thinking, if someone's going to get a $30,000 a year increase, having a great, therapy pet program isn't going to get them to stay. Like you're going to need also compensation to be correct, and you need to get proactive about that. And so we need to, as comp professionals, get in on this whole golden opportunity and start reminding organizations that comp is a critical part of this. What's your guys' reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very rare that someone's going to leave a company and then take a job somewhere else if the money is not better. I know it does happen, for a good opportunity, you'll take a little less money or even, sort of at par. But that's the number one thing that people are looking for when they get into the interview process. They're talking to recruiters. Recruiters reach out to them on LinkedIn. They want to know, all right, what's the salary going to be? Is it going to be better for my bottom line here? And, I think if companies can get the compensation aspect correct, then you'll sway people from looking around a little bit more and starting to hear more about other companies. And, I think it plays a huge part in
that. I agree. And I always find that kind of story fascinating. And in fact, I have a little personal, I'm one of those people, although a long, long time ago, early in my career. In fact, I think it was $30,000 or $40,000 I got as an offer to go elsewhere. Keep in mind what I do for a living, to go to a competitor. And I came back and, I gave my notice and said, I'm leaving. And they asked, what the offer was. And I told them. And after being told for over a year that I was paid at the top of the range, blah, 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 you couldn't move because of corporate guidelines. Within an hour, I had a matching offer. There's a couple things about that.
Right.
It drove me crazy. I'm just telling the story as a way of saying, keep in mind the psychology of the person you're talking to, the employee. And they were like, great news. We'll match that offer.
Yeah.
And I was like, where's the integrity? I'm like, number one,
I'm like, no.
For a year, that's not possible. Mm-hmm. And then within an hour, you do it. And two is not even a penny more. It was like, and so it's like,
right.
And I'm sitting there going, I think it's time for me to try a different organization and, a different culture and environment and see maybe like this new employer will be a little bit more straightforward in dealing with employees. And, it is a problem for how do you deal with those offers?
Yeah.
And matching offers. And it's always about the money, often about other things too. And by the time somebody gets an offer, it's sometimes too late, almost always too late, because, then they're in it. And, you're in a sales cycle. The grass is always greener on the other side.
But not only that, you've already established, your point, Bill, and I've, and this is debatable, I know, but as a leader myself, I've had conversations with managers I've been mentoring and training, and I always try to teach people when they become first-time leaders and they started getting exposed to the salary process and how you compensate your team. I say you should be in a mindset where you don't do counter offers. And if you have good people, you need to be proactively keeping them at or above market. Because the message you send, and it's not for your best interest, it's for their best interest. The message you send to somebody when they have to come to you to get a raise like $30,000 is, we're not going to give you a raise unless you go look, right? And we are not proactively a company that has your best interest, your career path, and your compensation and your financial health, well-being at heart. We are an organization that is looking to get the most out of you for the least we can pay you, and we will continue to operate that way. So if you are thinking about employee engagement, that is the message you are sending your team, in my belief. That's the message you send your team whenever you don't proactively keep people at market. And one of the people, again, at this conference was talking about this idea, well, when people come at me and they quote, maybe they haven't got an offer yet. Maybe they're trying to be a good employee and they like where they work, and they're coming back to you and they're saying, well, I'm hearing or I'm seeing that I could leave and go make this. How can we get to this? And not just a completely fair sort of thing to do. And it's kind of what you want your team members to do, right? And they talk about how over maybe a year, 2 years, we can get you to market and blah, blah. And I literally said as part of my presentation, like, everyone needs to recognize that the moment someone accepts another job offer, they instantly go to market, right? You get to market price as soon as you take another job. That's just how it works. So if your company's position is, we will over time get people to market, you're basically telling them you could be on this long-term, maybe get you to market for 6 months, 18 months, 24-month program, or you could go across the street and have it tomorrow, your choice. And it's kind of what you're saying. No one would position it that way, but that's exactly what you're doing to your employees. Right.
I think that's true. And that's, the companies look at, and this is where you have to become strategic. Companies look at it as, we have this whole portfolio of people that we're trying to manage, and jobs and employees, that we're, trying to manage the whole pool of people. But the individual employee, they have one person that they're focused on themselves. Right. And so, it may be fine logically to say, let's get you up to market over a 2-year period. But again, you're right. It's like, or I can walk across the street.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about this is, and I think the trick here, and this is why we do need to get in on this golden age sort of move, this golden opportunity, is I think the trick is to work with your employees and work with your teams and have the career pathing conversation and help them understand how there is a long-term plan for you here at our company, and how that long-term plan will both up-level your skills and up-level your value, so we will up-level your compensation, and we have a whole path for you here. And if you're waking up every morning realizing you're on a 2, 3, 5, 10-year path to director, and you've just been hired, but you've got this 10-year path to director, and you can see what your pay increases are probably going to be as long as you don't screw up and you meet all your goals and do all your things. I know that's really hard for HR teams and managers to think through and manage for their people. But if you can get to a place somewhere near that, at least for your critical roles, I think that's true employee engagement, and that's true, value for value, right? You're giving value to your employee, they're giving value to you, and you're going to build a very strong relationship there.
One thing to add into that, and I think, where this is going to sound counterintuitive, but where, HR can really take control is by giving up control.
Yes.
Everyone's going to quote me on that. if you're at anything other than a small company, HR shouldn't be the primary connection to the employee because there are too many employees. I mean, you provide a service to the employee, you can help them and your door is open, but the manager should be the one who are having those conversations about career pathing. And HR should be helping managers do a great job at that, as well as empowering them to have a little flexibility so that you can have an honest as a manager, can have an honest conversation with an employee and say, where do you want your career to go? Or where do you want, how do you want this relationship to evolve? Because I think all too often, old school HR has a career ladder for every person in mind. And it's you start at, accountant 1, and then you go to accountant 2, and then you go to accountant 3. Not every person that starts as an accountant wants to work their way up to CFO. Some of them want to do other things. And so understanding what those people want creates the connection that's critical for engagement. And I think you got to make sure that that's a two-way dialogue, that it's real, and it's sort of at ground level, manager to employee. And then it changes over time. So keep those conversations going. And I think in that way, distributing the relationship task out to managers and letting them control the relationships in a smart way, and letting people do things that are a little off from the pure definition of the job, if that's going to help, leave it to the manager to get his or her, function, their deliverables done in the way they want to do it, in the way that's most advantageous to their team, not, from a corporate hierarchy down, every accountant must do X, Y, and Z. That's not necessarily the best way to get the job done, the best way to get employees engaged.
I think that's right, Bill. What a great way to summarize this whole thing. I think the golden opportunity then, according to Bill, is to, which I think is right, is to empower, right? Maybe it's maybe giving up control to have more control, but maybe it's to empower our managers and our employees to have these opportunities, right? And we in HR and in Total Rewards have to make sure they're armed with this stuff, which is a lot of work, but it is a golden opportunity. And so what do you think? What do you think out there? Do you think this is a golden opportunity? Do you think, is your organization thinking of new ways to vault and leverage your HR and Total Rewards team? Let us know. Send email to us, coffee@payscale.com, or just tweet at us at Payscale, and we'll look forward to your feedback. And thanks for listening to another Comp and Coffee. Comp and Coffee is a PayFactors production dedicated to the compensation community. We welcome your feedback. Send email to coffee@payfactors.com, tweet us at PayFactors, or share your thoughts in our PayFactors community tile. Until next time, keep your coffee hot and your data fresh.